how do I deal with the fact that I won't have the same path as some other people? So we've been discussing the project's progress. Right?
Yes, I believe we're on track with the initial phase.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're exploring deep in this amazing jungle. I think for me, the biggest thing is just trying to stay consistent with my routine.
These are very fresh, picked this morning. They look wonderful. How much for this bag?
I believe it's important to understand the nuances of the situation before making any rash decisions.
Is the water warm enough?
Yes, it feels just right.
So that's how we're building a more inclusive and sustainable future for everyone.
The morning began not with sunlight, but with the soft cries of a child, a sound that pulled Tieu Ca from shallow sleep into the restless rhythm of her daily life. Her youngest, Han, stirred in her arms, his small fists clutching at her blouse, as though the world outside might vanish if he let go. She shifted gently, humming under her breath, offering the comfort of warmth and milk, because for now, that was all she could give. Across the room, Long, her elder son, sat cross-legged on the floor, his eyes half-lidded from sleep but waiting patiently for the promise of breakfast. The room smelled faintly of damp wood and instant noodles, a scent that spoke of survival more than choice. Tieu Ca placed Han in the cradle and moved to the small stove, the kettle hissing with tired urgency. She tore open a packet of noodles, watching the dried coils fall into the pot, steam rising like fragile ghosts. Long watched silently until she handed him a bowl. He ate quickly, not because it was delicious, but because hunger demanded it. And Tieu Ca felt the familiar sting of guilt pierce her chest. She wanted more for her children, yet every day seemed to ask more of her than she had left to give. The house, small and weary from years of neglect, held little privacy, little comfort, yet it was theirs. When her mother arrived, carrying the strength of years etched into her frame, Tieu Ca felt her burden lighten, if only slightly. The older woman greeted the children with the tenderness of someone who had raised too many and lost too much, her hands steady as she lifted Han with practiced ease. "I will take him," she said softly. "You need time to work." Tieu Ca nodded, gratitude and shame warring in her chest. It was not easy to accept help, yet she had learned that survival often depended on it. With her mother watching the children, she turned her focus to the endless chores that filled her hours. Washing clothes by hand, scrubbing dishes, sweeping dust that returned like an unwelcome guest. Every task felt like an ocean tide, retreating only to surge back stronger, and yet she continued, because stopping was not an option. Elsewhere, in the clattering world of business, conversations of a different weight unfolded. At a sawmill thick with the scent of resin and dust, the manager leaned across his desk toward one of his workers. They spoke of numbers, of losses, of the decision to shift production from 1-meter planks to those measuring 1.3 meters, a change they hoped would squeeze more profit from the same trees. The worker nodded but raised doubts, his voice low, his eyes cautious. They spoke of relocating the mill entirely, of tearing it from its roots and planting it on new land, where a villa might one day rise from the soil. But in their words, shadows lingered. Mentions of Don's arrest, whispers of Diep's disappearance. Business was never just business here. It was tangled with secrets, betrayals, and threats that bled beyond the timber and into lives like Tieu Ca's, fragile yet unyielding. When CEO Hung arrived at Tieu Ca's home later that week, the air shifted. He did not come with the arrogance of wealth, but with the calm assurance of a man who carried responsibility as both weapon and shield. He found her in the kitchen, sleeves rolled, hands submerged in soapy water, her face pale from exhaustion. Without asking, he stepped beside her, took a plate from her hands, and began to scrub. She protested at first, embarrassed, but his steady presence silenced her resistance. Together they washed in silence, the clink of porcelain and rush of water filling the small room like an unfamiliar kind of music. When the work was done, he examined the rooftop, noting the sagging tiles, the wires that hung like tired veins. Later, he installed solar panels himself, sweat beading on his brow, his hands steady with purpose. "This will give you light," he said simply, "and lessen the weight of bills." He promised to bring new wiring as well, insisting that safety came before pride. Tieu Ca felt torn between relief and discomfort. She had learned to live on little, to rely only on herself and the quiet strength of her mother. Accepting Hung's help felt like borrowing light from a stranger, one that might one day vanish. Yet when he spoke of his brother who had left to manage affairs abroad and of the weight that now rested solely on his shoulders, she recognized in him the same exhaustion she carried. Responsibility was a heavy crown, whether worn by a struggling mother or a corporate leader. Their conversation stretched into small hours. Hung spoke of state assistance that covered her children's school fees, assuring her she need not worry. He promised to handle the electricity bills himself, waving away her protests. "You should save your strength for them," he said, nodding toward the children sleeping nearby. His generosity embarrassed her, yet it also softened something inside her, a reminder that kindness could still exist even when the world demanded so much cruelty. Life wove on with threads of both hardship and hope. In the market, another woman carried baskets of guavas, her hands rough from harvest, her smile polite as she called out prices. Customers paused, some haggling, others nodding in approval. One man lingered, recalling how he had once bought guavas elsewhere for 30,000 a kilo and promised to help her pick fruit when the season returned. Their exchange was simple, ordinary, yet beneath it pulsed the same resilience Tieu Ca carried, the stubborn refusal to let the world dictate defeat. Back in the realm of business and distance, two men spoke in hushed tones. One, a subordinate weary from travel, asked permission to return to Vietnam. His duties abroad were finished, he explained, and matters at home demanded his presence. He spoke of someone named Diep, of obligations left unresolved. The superior considered his words, then advised patience, telling him to wait a few more days until everything was certain. Work demanded order. Home would wait, yet the man's eyes betrayed urgency, the kind that came not from duty but from longing. As for Tieu Ca, her days blurred into cycles of chores, childcare, and conversations with Hung. They spoke of planting vegetables, of preparing supplies for her children's schooling, of futures that seemed fragile yet possible. Each moment carried a balance of pride and humility. Her pride in surviving with so little, her humility in accepting his aid. But beneath the ordinary beats of life, tension pulsed. The sawmill's plans, Dawn's arrest, Diep's disappearance, the shifting weight of debts and deals, all were threads weaving into a fabric larger than Tieu Ca could yet see. And though Hung's presence brought light, she sensed in her bones that light always cast shadows, and sooner or later, those shadows would come knocking at her fragile door. Night settled gently over the small house, the thin curtains swaying in the breeze that carried scents of earth and wood smoke. Tieu Ca sat by the dim glow of a kerosene lamp, Long sprawled across her lap with a worn notebook while Han slept in his cradle. She traced characters in the margins of Long's homework, guiding his hand patiently, though exhaustion tugged at her eyelids. The day had been long, laundry soaking her hands raw, endless cooking, the weight of worry pressing into her bones. But still she found the strength to sit with him, to remind herself that her sacrifices had meaning. In that fragile silence, a knock came at the door. She opened it to find Hung standing there, not with the commanding air of a CEO, but with the weary posture of a man carrying burdens. In his hands, he held a small box. Inside, neatly stacked notebooks, pencils, and rulers. "For Long and Han," he said softly, "school should not feel like a battle." She blinked, caught between gratitude and discomfort. "You've done too much already," she whispered. But he only smiled, placing the box on the table. There is no such thing as too much when it comes to children. His words settled into the room like a balm, and Long's eyes lit with wonder as he flipped through the new pages, his joy a sharp reminder to Tieu Ca of how little her children had and how deeply they deserved more. Over the following weeks, Hung became a fixture in their lives. Sometimes he arrived with groceries, sometimes with nothing more than his presence. He fixed the roof where it sagged, replaced fraying wires with new ones, and each improvement left the house brighter, safer. Yet he never demanded thanks, never sought recognition. He moved through their lives quietly, like a steady current beneath turbulent waters. Tieu Ca struggled with her pride, often biting back words of refusal, but each time she saw her children's laughter, she swallowed them, knowing that dignity could not outweigh their happiness. Still, whispers from beyond the village reached her ears. In the markets and along the dusty roads, people spoke of business gone sour, of the sawmill manager planning new ventures, of Don's arrest and Diep's mysterious disappearance. The words were fragmented, heavy with rumor, but they painted a picture of a world tilting toward danger. Tieu Ca felt far removed from those affairs, yet she knew well enough that storms in the distance had a way of sending winds to every door. One afternoon, as she gathered vegetables from the garden, Hung joined her, his jacket tossed aside, his hands working the soil with surprising ease. "You have strength," he remarked, watching her shoulders move with practiced rhythm. She laughed softly, brushing sweat from her brow. "Strength is not a choice, it is survival." He nodded, his gaze lingering on her longer than before, something unspoken glimmering in his eyes. For a moment, silence stretched between them, filled only by the rustle of leaves. Then Han's cry cut through, pulling her back to reality, reminding her that dreams of ease were luxuries she could not afford. That evening, they cooked together again, the children darting around their legs while rice simmered and vegetables sizzled in oil. Hung spoke of his brother abroad, of the weight of responsibility left in his hands. "It is a strange thing," he admitted, "to carry a business empire and yet find peace only in moments like this, washing dishes, chopping onions, listening to laughter." Tieu Ca glanced at him, her lips curving into a tired smile. "Peace is not found in wealth. It is found where love lives." He said nothing, but the look in his eyes told her he had heard more than her words. As days turned into weeks, their bond deepened. He helped with school fees, though the government already covered part, insisting on taking care of utilities and small expenses. She resisted, embarrassed by his generosity, but he was firm, reminding her that accepting help was not weakness. "One day," he said, "you will help another, and the circle will continue." She wondered if he believed that, or if he simply wanted her to feel lighter. Meanwhile, the sawmill's troubles grew louder. Workers grumbled about new planks, about profit margins stretched thin. The manager spoke of building a villa, of relocating operations, of securing control in uncertain times. Yet beneath his words lingered shadows, enemies circling, allies vanishing, the fabric of business fraying at its seams. Tieu Ca listened when she overheard men talk in the market, but she tried to push it from her mind. Still, fear gnawed at her, because men like Hung were tethered to that world, and the closer he drew to her, the closer those shadows crept as well. The turning point came when her mother fell ill. Fever gripped the older woman suddenly, leaving her weak and bedridden. Tieu Ca panicked, torn between caring for her children and her mother, the weight of responsibility threatening to break her. When Hung learned, he came at once, bringing medicine, summoning a doctor, sitting at the bedside through the night. His presence was steady, his voice calm, and though the fever eventually broke, Tieu Ca found herself shaken, not just by fear, but by gratitude so deep it frightened her. For the first time in years, she felt she was not alone. Yet with that comfort came a new conflict inside her. Whispers in the village grew sharper. Some praised Hung's generosity, others questioned his intentions. Was he helping out of kindness, or did he expect something in return? Was he a savior, or a man weaving himself into her life for reasons she could not yet see? She did not know, and the uncertainty left her restless. One night, after the children had fallen asleep, she asked him directly, "Why do you do all this? For me? For them? You owe us nothing." He looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Perhaps it is because I see in you a strength that humbles me. Perhaps it is because your children remind me of what matters more than contracts and profit. Or perhaps it is simply because I cannot watch someone fight alone when I have the power to stand beside them." His voice was quiet but steady, and though she wanted to doubt, she could not. His eyes carried truth, and in that truth she felt both comfort and fear. Comfort in his sincerity, fear in how much she had come to depend on him. As autumn deepened, life settled into fragile rhythms. She worked, he visited, the children grew. Yet beneath the ordinary beats of daily life, the undercurrents of danger and business still swirled. The mention of Diep's disappearance haunted conversations. Dawn's arrest cast shadows over allies and enemies alike. Hung carried those burdens silently, never speaking of the darker corners of his world, but Tieu Ca sensed them in the tightness of his jaw. The nights he lingered longer than necessary, the way his eyes sometimes searched the horizon as though expecting trouble. For now, though, peace held, fragile and imperfect, but real. And as Tieu Ca tucked her children into bed, listening to their soft breathing, she allowed herself the rarest of luxuries, hope. The first chill of winter crept into the village, carried by winds that rattled the shutters of Tieu Ca's small house. She wrapped Long and Han in extra blankets, her hands rough but gentle, her heart heavy with the knowledge that warmth came not from wealth, but from persistence. Outside, the fields slept beneath pale skies, and yet life pressed on. She rose before dawn, lit the small stove, and prepared what little she had, determined that her children would never feel the cold emptiness of hunger as sharply as she did. Hung's visits grew more frequent as the days shortened. He arrived not as a guest, but as though he belonged, carrying supplies, checking wires, tightening bolts, bringing with him the steady calm of a man unwilling to let hardship dictate defeat. One evening he brought firewood stacked neatly on a cart, his hands reddened from labor. "It will last the winter," he said simply, brushing off her protests. She wanted to argue, wanted to insist that she could manage, but the truth hung unspoken. Without him, she might not. Pride warred with gratitude, but when she saw Long's delighted smile as he warmed his hands near the flames, she let the argument die on her lips. Yet even as Hung's presence became a lifeline, shadows lengthened beyond their fragile circle of warmth. Rumors spread of the sawmill shifting hands, of debts unpaid, of rivals circling like wolves. The names of Dawn and Diep echoed still, tied to mysteries that no one dared unravel openly. Tieu Ca heard fragments in the market, whispers carried by men with lowered voices, and each whisper was a reminder that Hung's world was not as simple as chopping wood and fixing roofs. He bore burdens she could not see, and she feared one day they would spill into her life. The storm came sooner than she expected. One afternoon, Hung arrived late, his eyes sharp, his movements tense. He said little as he repaired a loose shutter, but Tieu Ca sensed the weight pressing against him. Finally, as they sat over a simple meal of rice and vegetables, she asked, "What is it? You carry storms in your silence." He looked at her then, his gaze steady, and admitted, "There are men who would rather see me fall. The sawmill, the contracts, the power it represents, it breeds envy. I cannot keep those battles entirely from you, no matter how I try." Fear flickered in her chest, but she held his gaze. "And what of us? What of Long and Han?" His answer was firm, unyielding. "You are my reason to fight harder. Nothing touches you. Nothing touches them. Not while I stand." The days that followed were uneasy. She continued her routines, cooking, cleaning, tending the small garden, but each sound outside made her pulse quicken. Hung stationed men discreetly near the property, though he told her they were only workers keeping watch on supplies. She knew better. The world beyond her door was shifting, and though she wanted to shut it out, it crept closer with each passing day. One evening, her fears became flesh. Returning from the market with Han on her hip and Long tugging at her sleeve, she noticed two men lingering near her gate, their eyes too sharp, their smiles wrong. Her steps faltered, but before she could turn, a familiar voice called her name. Hung stepped forward from the shadows, his figure solid, his presence commanding. The men shifted uneasily, muttered something about being lost, and disappeared into the dusk. Her knees weakened, and Hung caught her arm, steadying her. "You see," he said softly, "the shadows are real, but so am I." That night, after the children slept, Tieu Ca confronted him. "Why bring this danger here? Why tie your world to mine if it means they may suffer?" His answer was not what she expected. He knelt before her, his voice low but burning with conviction. "Because you are already part of my world. Whether I stand at the head of a company or beside a broken stove, it is you and these children who give me reason. Without you, all the power I hold means nothing." His confession left her trembling, torn between fear of what he represented and the undeniable truth that his presence had become the pillar of her days. The weeks ahead tested that pillar. Trouble from the sawmill boiled over, an embezzlement scandal, whispers of violence, rival factions clawing for control. Hung was pulled deeper into conflict, his days consumed by meetings, his nights haunted by vigilance. Yet even then, he returned to her, sometimes with weary eyes, sometimes with bruised knuckles, but always with the same steady words. "You are safe." And safe they remained, though danger brushed their door more than once. It was during these trials that Tieu Ca's own strength revealed itself. She learned to stretch each coin further, to mend clothes until the fabric barely held, to comfort her children when their questions about absent fathers and silent fears grew too sharp. She became not just survivor, but shield. Her love for Long and Han, as fierce as any weapon, Hung wielded. Then came the night when all threads converged. Hung arrived late, his jacket torn, his eyes blazing with the fire of a man who had faced war and returned alive. He gathered her and the children close, his voice breaking but resolute. "It is done. The mill is ours again. The rivals are gone, but the cost was heavy, and it will not be the last battle." Tieu Ca listened, her heart pounding, then placed her hand over his. "Battles will come, yes, but so will mornings and laughter and the smell of noodles on the stove. If we can hold to that, we can survive anything." For the first time, she saw him smile. Not the polite smile of a businessman, not the weary smile of a man carrying burdens, but a smile born of hope. In that moment, she knew their lives would never be simple, never free of shadows, but they would be theirs. As winter deepened, light glowed warmer inside the small home. Long studied with his new notebooks, Han toddled with growing strength, and Tieu Ca felt something she had not dared in years: stability. Hung continued to stand at their side, not as a distant benefactor, but as a man who had chosen them, who had fought for them, who had found in their fragile world a reason to endure his own storms. And so their story did not end with triumph or tragedy, but with a fragile truth that even in a world of debts, betrayals, and shadows, love could carve out a sanctuary. It was not wealth that sustained them, nor power, but the quiet resilience of a woman, the laughter of 2 children, and the unwavering devotion of a man who refused to let darkness win. For Tieu Ca, survival had once meant only enduring. Now, with Hung beside her, survival had transformed into something greater, living, hoping, and daring to believe that tomorrow could hold more than struggle. And though storms would always gather, though whispers would always linger, she finally understood. Light does not banish shadows, it defies them. And in that defiance, she and her children had found a future.